The wind across the Arizona Territory in the spring of 1878 carried the smell of creosote and broken promises. Elias McAllister stood on the sagging porch of his half-built cabin and watched that wind scour the empty flats until the horizon itself seemed to bleed red dust. 36 years old, sun-cracked and solitary, he had come west with one dream burning in his chest: gold. Not the yellow dust men pan from streams, but the deep, quiet fortune that waited in the Superstition Mountains, the kind that would let a man buy back every acre his father lost in Tennessee, every dignity the war had stolen. He had filed his claim, sunk his shaft, and for 3 blistering years he had blasted, picked, and prayed. All he had to show for it was a pile of worthless quartz, a lame mule, and a letter from the assay office that read, in polite bureaucratic ink, "No commercial value." So when the stagecoach driver Hank Rollins clattered into the yard one April afternoon with a U.S. Army envelope addressed to E. McAllister, "Lucky cuss mine," Elias figured it was the government finally foreclosing on his dream. He slit the envelope with his skinning knife, expecting condemnation. Instead he read it read. By order of the Department of the Interior and the Office of Indian Affairs, you are hereby granted custody of one female Apache prisoner of war, recently removed from the San Carlos Reservation following the Cibecue uprising. Said prisoner, designated Hostile Number 47, is to be placed under civilian indenture for a period of 7 years in lieu of continued incarceration. You will provide food, shelter, and Christian instruction. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of your mining claim. Elias read it twice. Then he laughed, one short, cracked bark that scared the mule. "An Apache slave bride," he said aloud. "Lord, I asked for gold and you sent me trouble with braids." Hank Rollins spat tobacco and grinned. "She's in the cage on the back, partner. Army says if you don't take her, they shoot her. Simple as that." Elias walked around the coach. Lashed to the luggage rack was a small iron-barred box meant for drunken miners or mad dogs. Inside, knees drawn to chest, sat a girl no more than 19. Her black hair hung in 2 thick plaits tied with strips of red cloth. Her dress, what had once been velvet, was now rags the color of dried blood. Her eyes, when they lifted to meet his, were not defeated. They were measuring him the way a mountain lion measures distance before it leaps. The soldiers had chained her ankles. When Elias unlocked the cage, she did not move. Only watched. "What's your name?" he asked in English. "Nothing." He tried Spanish. Still nothing. Finally, feeling 10 kinds of fool, he touched his chest. "Elias." Then he pointed at her. For a long moment the desert wind was the only sound. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she answered in English better than his own. "Not Oste." He repeated it clumsily. She did not smile, but something in her shoulders loosened a fraction. That night he gave her the cabin and slept in the barn with the mule. He left a plate of beans and cornbread outside the door. In the morning the plate was clean and waiting, washed in the creek. So began the strangest spring of Elias McAllister's life. He had expected hatred. He had braced for escape attempts, for a knife in the dark. Instead he got silence that felt louder than shouting. Not Oste moved through his days like smoke, feeding the chickens before he woke, hauling water without being asked, mending the corral fence with rawhide strips she braided while he pretended not to watch. One afternoon he found her at the creek, singing low under her breath as she pounded laundry against a rock. The song had no words he knew, but it made the cottonwoods shiver. When she stopped the instant she saw him, as though joy were a crime. That night he left a small bundle on the table, a bar of store-bought soap that smelled of lilac, a bone comb, and a blue hair ribbon he had carried in his pocket for 3 years waiting for a woman who never came west. She never thanked him aloud, but the next morning her braids shone like spilled ink and the ribbon fluttered at the end of one plait like a defiant flag. Weeks slid past. The mine shaft yawned empty. The mule grew fat on spring grass. And Elias found himself talking, not the gruff orders he gave most men, but real talking, about his father's farm burned by Sherman's men, about his mother's Bible now mouse-chewed and forgotten, about how he had once believed gold could fix a broken soul. Nadosti listened. Sometimes she answered in short sentences that cut straight to bone. "You dig for yellow rock," she said once, watching him sort or samples. "But rock does not care if you are lonely." Another time, when he cursed the broken windmill, she asked, "Why do white men always fight the land instead of ask it?" He had no answer. The first time she laughed, it startled them both. He had been trying to rope a half-wild steer and ended up face down in the water trough. When he came up sputtering, she was bent double, hands on knees, the sound bright and unexpected as birdsong after drought. For 1 second the distance between Tennessee dirt farmer and Apache girl stole from her mountains disappeared. Then her face shuddered again, as if laughter had betrayed her. But the seed was planted. Summer heat pressed down like a hot iron. The army sent no further word. Apparently one Apache girl indentured to a failed prospector was not worth the paper. Elias stopped locking the cabin door. Nadosti began leaving small gifts, a perfect hawk feather on his plate, a tiny basket woven of yucca so tight it held water, a strip of jerky spiced in a way that made his eyes water and his heart glad. One night thunder rolled in from the Mogollon Rim and the sky split open. Rain hammered the tin roof like buckshot. Elias sat inside nursing coffee gone cold, listening to the storm argue with itself. The door creaked. Nadosti stood there in one of his old shirts, barefoot, holding something wrapped in a flour sack. She crossed the room and laid it on the table. Inside was a nugget the size of a hen's egg, pure gold quartz veined with sun-colored fire. He stared. "Where?" She pointed east, toward the dry wash behind the ridge he had never bothered to prospect because the assay map said it was barren. "I follow Coyote," she said simply. "Coyote always knows where water and shiny rock hide." He turned the nugget in trembling fingers. It was heavy. Real. Enough to pay the back taxes, buy cattle, maybe even send for a preacher if a man was fool enough to hope. He looked up to thank her and the words died. Her face was wet, not from rain. Tears cut pale trails through the dust on her cheeks. "This makes you free of me," she whispered. "Now you have gold. You send me back, or sell me, or..." Her voice cracked on the last word she could not say. Elias felt something rip inside his chest. He set the nugget down as though it burned. "Nadosti," he said, and her Apache name felt right in his mouth now, like it had always belonged there. "That gold don't buy my freedom. It buys yours." She blinked. He picked up the army letter, walked to the stove, and fed it to the flames. The paper curled black, then glowed, then was ash. "You ain't no slave," he said. "Not to the army. Not to me. Never again." For a long moment she only stared. Then she sank to her knees, not in submission, but because her legs would no longer hold her, and pressed her forehead to the rough floorboards as though the earth itself had opened and shown her mercy she never dared dream. Elias knelt too, awkward and too big for the small cabin, and laid one clumsy hand on her shaking shoulder. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving the world washed clean. Autumn painted the desert in colors most Easterners swore were lies: vermilion cliffs, turquoise sky, grass so gold it shamed the metal Elias no longer chased. He and Nadosti, she had begun answering to Dosti when he stumbled over the full name, had filed a new claim together. Her nugget had been only the first. The dry wash ran rich for 50 yards, a secret the Apache had known for generations and kept even while dying. They worked it slow, by hand, the way she showed him, following quartz stringers like veins in a giant body, listening to the earth instead of bullying it. Word spread. Prospectors came sniffing. Some offered cash. One offered marriage, to Elias, for the claim. Elias ran them off with a Winchester across his arm and Dosti standing beside him, silent but unafraid, her presence more warning than any bullet. Winter found them with a small herd of cattle bought cheap from a man fleeing Apaches, a vegetable patch that actually grew things, and a cabin that now had 2 chairs by the fire. One December evening snow flurried soft as down feathers, rare enough to feel like miracle in that country. They sat close to the stove sharing coffee laced with canned milk. Dosti held the cup in both hands the way her people did, letting the heat seep into her bones. "I dreamed last night," she said suddenly. Elias waited. She spoke of dreams the way some spoke of scripture. "I stood on the ridge where the 4 winds meet. My mother was there, and my little brother the soldiers shot. They were not angry. They smiled. My mother said, 'You carried our song across the fire. It is enough.' Then the wind carried them away like smoke." She looked at him, eyes shining with something between sorrow and wonder. "I woke up, not empty. Full." Elias swallowed hard. "I used to dream of gold," he said. "Every night for years. Haven't had that dream once since the night I burned that paper." They sat in silence that was comfortable now, woven through with crackle of pine knots and soft hush of snow against the window. Finally he reached into his pocket and drew out a small pouch. From it he took a plain gold band he had traded 3 steers for in Prescott, hammered by a German jeweler who asked no questions. "I ain't much," he said, cheeks coloring under the tan. "But if you'd wear it, I'd be honored to call you wife. Not because the army said so. Not because of any claim or paper. Just because, well, because you're the finest thing ever happened to this broken-down Tennessee boy." Dosti stared at the ring as though it might bite her. Then she looked up and the smile that broke across her face was the same one that had startled them both the day he fell in the trough, only now it stayed. She slipped the ring on herself. It fit perfect, as if the gold remembered where it came from. "I already call you husband," she said softly. "In my heart, since the night you gave me back my name." He laughed then, a sound that came from deep places, and pulled her into his arms. She came willing, fierce, the way desert rain comes when the clouds finally let go. Years later, folks in Prescott would tell the story of the Lucky Cuss Ranch, the spread that rose from a played-out mine because a white man chose kindness over a fortune and an Apache girl chose trust over revenge. They had 6 children with eyes dark as midnight and hair the color of summer wheat. They spoke Apache to their mother and English to their father and Spanish to the vaqueros and made up new words when the old ones weren't big enough for what they felt. The mine played out by 1890, but the ranch never did. When the children were grown, Elias and Dosti built a schoolhouse on the hill. Any child, Apache, Mexican, white, black, was welcome. Dosti taught the girls to weave baskets tight enough to hold water and the boys to listen to the land. Elias taught them all how to read, using his mother's mouse-chewed Bible and whatever newspapers blew in on the stage. On the porch evenings, when the sky burned orange and the cattle lowed soft in the corrals, Elias would take Dosti's hand, still slender, still strong, and quote the only verse he ever memorized by heart. "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass." She would finish for him in Apache, the words rolling like summer thunder, and then they would sit in silence that needed no translation. The ranch is still there today, though the cabin burned in the big fire of 1953 and the mine entrance collapsed long ago. But if you ride out on a quiet evening when the creosote blooms after rain, folks say you can hear laughter on the wind, bright and unexpected as birdsong after drought. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you might find a small nugget glinting in the dry wash. Pick it up and it will be warm, as though the earth remembers 2 hearts that once chose each other over every shining lie the world tried to sell them. Because the rancher dreamed of gold, but what heaven sent him was a woman brave enough to teach him that the real treasure was never under the ground. It was standing right in front of him, all along, waiting to see if he was man enough to set her free, and in doing so, set himself free too. And that, friends, is worth more than every nugget ever pulled from the superstitions, now and forevermore.